This is how Canelo could actually lose to Terence Crawford. In this video, I'm gonna expose the 3 keys to victory Crawford absolutely must implement in order to win this fight. Let's stick to the end to hear my official prediction on who will win. Let's get into it. The first key to victory for Crawford has to do with his stance. Bud is what they call a switch hitter. For those who don't know, a switch hitter is simply a fighter who can fight both orthodox stance, which is leading with your left hand, and southpaw stance, which is leading with your right hand. But I think it'll be wise for Bud to stick to fighting Canelo as a southpaw, and here's why. First is because Canelo is an orthodox fighter. So when a southpaw fights an orthodox, that's called an open stance fight. In high level open stance fights, there tends to be a battle for control of the space, which is done by sticking out their lead hands and fighting for top hand position. This is usually called a fencing battle. The benefits of this fencing battle is if you're winning it, which is done by getting top hand position, it takes away your opponent's jab lane to the head because you have control of the space now. In the few open stance fights Canelo has fought, he doesn't really participate in the fencing battle. So with the jab to the head taken away, that's one less attack you gotta worry about. And since he really doesn't participate in the fencing battle, Crawford will be able to get off his lead hand attacks easier since he will have control of the space. But the biggest benefit Crawford will gain from controlling Canelo's lead hand lane is getting a better sense of when Canelo might be throwing his signature lead hook. You see, that lead hook of Canelo's is his most devastating punch. Many have fallen victim to it, so it is priority number 1 for Crawford to take that away from him. Luckily for Crawford, there's already been a blueprint set on how to use controls and probes to neutralize Canelo's style, but we'll dive deeper into those later on in the video. Now let's get into the next reason why I think Bud should fight Canelo southpaw. You see, in open stance fights, it's easier to land your backhand compared to closed stance fights. This benefits both fighters, but in this particular fight, I think it'll be a slightly bigger advantage for Bud due to a tendency of Canelo's. You see, Canelo loves to attack the body, specifically with his signature lead hook. This is a good, smart thing to do, but you see, the beauty in fighting is that everything has a counter to it, no matter how good or smart it is. You see, in an open stance fight, there's 2 very effective ways to counter and deal with the lead hook. The first one is to stay in the pocket and time the hook with your own uppercut. The second way to deal with it is to use movement. You see, you can use step back counters, or you could simply just use movement to evade the punch and reset. But in this particular fight, I think keeping Canelo on the outside will be Crawford's best defensive option with dealing with that lead hook and overall neutralizing Canelo. I'll dive deeper into how exactly Crawford could keep Canelo on the outside in a few. Now, there's one more reason why I suggest Crawford fights Canelo southpaw. You see, since southpaws are less common than orthodox fighters, Canelo has less experience fighting southpaws compared to fighting orthodox fighters. In an open stance fight, Bud will have the experience advantage, which at this level, any little advantage makes a huge difference. So lead hand control, options to take away the lead hook, and open stance experience advantage are the 3 reasons I think fighting Canelo southpaw is Bud's first key to victory. But the second key to victory is the most important one for a couple reasons. You see, Canelo's at his best when the fight is taking place at close or mid-range. Close range is the distance where only hooks and uppercuts are effective. Mid-range is the distance where all punches are effective. So since these distances are where Canelo's abilities and style are best at, it is of the utmost importance that Crawford keeps the fight at long range, which is the distance where only jabs and straight crosses are effective. There's a few things Crawford can do to keep the fight at long range, and it all starts with his footwork. Crawford will have to keep his feet moving all night long in order to stay at long range and outbox Canelo. A big advantage Crawford's gonna have is foot speed. A great way Crawford could take advantage of this foot speed is by using lateral movement throughout the whole fight. The lateral movement will help in keeping distance between Canelo and Crawford. It'll make Canelo miss more, but most importantly, it's gonna allow Crawford to set up lateral traps for Canelo. You see, lateral traps are when you are moving side to side, but then stop and set your feet to attack your opponent right before he is able to set his feet. This is an extremely effective tactic because your opponent doesn't know when you're going to stop and set your feet. Only you do, which makes it extremely difficult to defend lateral traps. But lateral traps isn't the only tactic Crawford could use with his footwork. You see, it'll be extremely wise for Crawford to also utilize disengagement traps, which are when you back up from an exchange or position with a couple steps to make your opponent follow you out, then quickly set your feet and attack him as he is following you before he sets his feet. If Bud mixes in disengagement traps along with lateral traps, he will keep Canelo guessing, which will slow him down and make it easier to control the distance. Along with using his footwork to utilize those traps, Crawford must also use his footwork to stay off the ropes. This is very important for Crawford to execute because 1, Canelo does his best work when he has you on the ropes. The reason this is the case is because his best work comes from his combinations with hooks and uppercuts. It's much easier to land hooks and uppercuts when you have your opponent on the ropes because the defensive options they have are limited since you can't move backwards once you're on the ropes. But if Crawford remains off the ropes, he can utilize all his defensive options, specifically step backs, to keep those hooks and uppercuts from landing. But for the small periods of time when Crawford is standing still with his feet set, he will need to heavily utilize hard feints to slow down Canelo and keep him from closing the distance without any hesitation. These feints will also be essential for Crawford to get Canelo to open up and start throwing offense, which will give Crawford the counter-punching opportunities he will need to beat Canelo. It's essentially going to be a high-level chess match of trying to counter the counter. Once Crawford lands his shots, he needs to keep moving. It's a recipe for disaster to stand still in front of Canelo for too long. There's been 3 fights that show us how much trouble Canelo has when he fights a fighter with phenomenal footwork paired with elite outside boxing skills. The first one is his loss against Dimitri Bivol. Bivol outboxed Canelo from the outside all night long with amazing footwork, staying off the ropes, and constantly moving while using his amazing jab. He also used his lead hand extremely well to control and slow down Canelo. I'll dive deeper into how Bud can use that specific tactic next. But there's another fight where Canelo struggled against an elite outside boxer who was his size, which was against Erislandy Lara. Even though Canelo did win this fight, it was an extremely close fight where many believe Lara should have got the decision. Nevertheless, Canelo struggled a lot with Lara's constant movement and use of long 1-2 and 2-1 combos. Canelo got outboxed in those 2 fights I just went over, but in his 3rd fight, Canelo got taken to school against a fighter who was much smaller than him. The fighter I'm referring to was against Floyd Money Mayweather. Floyd kept Canelo on the outside the whole fight with his jab, footwork, and counterpunching. Canelo had 0 answers for anything Floyd did. Floyd's pure boxing skills were just too much for Canelo. Now, let's get into how Bud could use controls and probes like Bivol did to neutralize Canelo. You see, Canelo bases his movement and pressure off back foot first steps. In boxing, the fundamentally correct way to move forward is to step your front foot first, then allow your back foot to follow. But Canelo does the opposite. By stepping with his back foot first, there's pros and cons to it. The pro is it helps in closing distance by disguising how far you really are. But the con to this can be easily exploited with controls and probes. You see, when you step back foot first, there is a small period of time where your back foot is off the ground and all your weight is on the front foot and you're stuck there in a vulnerable off-balance position. So controlling and attacking him in this position was the biggest key for Bivol neutralizing Canelo. Bivol would switch up between probing jabs, which are soft jabs with the intent of controlling space and occupying your opponent's guard. He would also use those controls I mentioned earlier where he would place his hand on Canelo's head and guard to limit and manipulate his movements, while also mixing in power shots with those probes and controls to really keep him guessing and hesitant. So there is already proof out there that using controls and probes mixed in with power shots to punish the back foot first steps is the kryptonite to that high guard pressure style from the Canelo camp. So fighting southpaw, using footwork to keep the fight on the outside, and using controls, probes mixed with power shots to neutralize Canelo are the 3 absolute must-do keys to victory for Crawford. Now that I've given you the blueprint on how Crawford could actually beat Canelo, here's my prediction on who will actually win this fight. This will be an extremely high-level chess match between 2 of the smartest and most skilled fighters in the world. It's an extremely tough fight to call, but if I had to pick one guy to win this fight, I'll pick Canelo by decision. I just think that given how skilled Canelo is, alongside how much punching power he possesses with those skills, with an extremely high fight IQ to go along with those skills and power, with those 3 attributes alone, it's already a 50-50 fight. But listen to this, that's without even mentioning how great of a chin Canelo has. Canelo has the best chin in boxing. Canelo has ate the best shots from Triple G and many other hard punchers who are much bigger than Crawford. So it's hard for me to imagine Crawford being able to hurt Canelo. Now add on that Bud is jumping up 2 weight classes to fight him. I just think that's too much of a weight jump to beat somebody as complete and skilled as Canelo. Weight classes exist for a reason, and there's been plenty of proof throughout the years of why they must be respected. Keep in mind, it's not like Bud started at 154 and is gonna jump 2 weight classes to 168. Bud started his career at 135 and has moved up in weight classes slowly throughout his career to end up at 154. But now he's going to jump up 2 weight classes in one fight to fight the best guy in the division, who's an all-time great, who has arguably the best chin of all time. I personally don't like those odds for Bud, but it's definitely not impossible for him to get it done. And if anybody can achieve something so remarkable to that level, it's Terence Bud Crawford. But me personally, I got my money on Canelo. It's honestly a shame Canelo's fighting Crawford instead of David Benavidez. It makes Canelo look really, really bad. If you want to learn about how good David Benavidez truly is and if he could beat Canelo, click on this video right here.